I'm Mike Costello, and I'd like to talk to you in the next few minutes about recreating your life. We believe that we live in the world, in our minds, and not in the world. We believe that we live in the world so often because it is the world around us that we see. But in reality, what really happens and what is really important is what happens in your mind and in my mind. If our lives are not the way we would like them to be, if there is a need for change or redirection in our life, it is up to us and it is within our power to change our way of thinking and thereby change the quality of our life. Recreating our life and recreating our world is a process of dynamic mind as much as it is the actions of our lives, the things that we do. Life is about growth and development. We are all in the process of becoming something more than we think that we are, something that we know that we are, because in truth we are spiritual beings in a physical experience. And the physical experience that we have of life brings us to a greater and deeper awareness of who and what we really are. If life isn't the way you would like it to be, if your existence is not what you would want it to be, you can begin the process of recreating life at any time in your life experience by redirecting and changing the way that you think about the circumstances and situations in life. Often we think about changing the world or recreating the world, but what we really need to focus on is the recreating of our world, not the world. The world is a much larger entity, and it is the composite of many different people and different experiences. And the larger world, the world, changes as our world changes. And our world, my world and your world, are the inner being, the inner process, the inner part of ourselves, the part of our minds. We begin the process of changing our mind by changing the way that we think about the circumstances and situations of life. Will life change? Of course it will. If there's one reality, one constant experience in our being, it is change. From the time that we're born until we make the transition that we call death, we are in the process of changing. We only need to look in a mirror to see that. We only need to look at the history of humankind and the global changes that have taken place in this world to know that there is an evolutionary process, there is an evolving and a becoming, and that we as part of the human family are a part of this magnificent evolution of the entire world experience. And as evolution moves through the process of change and unfoldment, we are individually becoming more of the people, the persons, and the spiritual beings that we were created to be. If we look at sea lions in the ocean and we look at harbor seals, we see the fact that here are two living creatures that are very much alike, but they're different. They're different in their habitat, they're different in their appearance, and they're different in their view of the world. A sea lion is a mammal like us and lives in the water, in the ocean, miles from land, rarely comes to land. But a harbor seal is at the seashore. It likes the water, it functions in the water, but it comes onto the land. The harbor seal is born into a condition and into an environment that is considerably different than that of the sea lion. But there is great similarity. In our life experience, all of us find ourselves in similar circumstances and situations. We are all in a human experience, but we are born into different circumstances and situations, into different nationalities, into different races, born to different creeds, ascribed to different political affiliations, and on goes the list that separates us. But the other aspect of our being is that which draws us into commonality. The common thread that runs through all of our lives is the reality of change. Dr. Garlish, who was the founder of our fellowship and a New Thought teacher of the early part of this century, was a great leader who brought to us a lot of wonderful inspiration. One of the things that Doctor used to like to say is that life is unceasing progression. That is the experience of life, your life and my life, and all of the lives of those on this planet, is in unceasing progression, going forward and ebbing like we see water ebb in a positive and wonderful way. And this progression is part of the process into which we want to go, into which we want to become a part, if we want to recreate our world when it seems that things aren't the way that we would like them to be. In the process of change in our lives, there is an unchanging reality, and the unchanging reality is the spiritual truth that undergirds us and supports us. It is the spiritual nature of our being. We are, as I said earlier, spiritual beings in a physical experience. And so the inner part of our being, which some people call the soul or the spirit, is the essence that does not change. It connects with that which is divine. It doesn't get old, it doesn't get sick, it doesn't have limit, it doesn't have lack. It is constantly attuned to the reality of divine presence and the conscious awareness of its unity with God. But the physical side of our being, these physical bodies, change because they are vehicles. So the experiences of our lives change because there are lessons that need to be learned in the spiritual realm that are taught to us through the physical experience. One of the things that we believe is that life is a school of the soul, and that the experiences of life, your life and my life, are bringing to us the lessons that we need to unfold and come to the realization and understanding of who and what we are as spiritual beings. In this process of the unchanging reality, we operate in a changing world and a changing environment. And because of that, the circumstances that we experience in daily human life are going to bring to us change again and again. When we're children, we grow to be adults. When we become adults, we have families and marry. Children are born of our families, and on goes the progression of life. In that process, there are a myriad of experiences that will come to us. Jobs will come and be lost. Jobs will change. Relationships will change. We will age. Those around us will age. We'll have good experiences, positive experiences, and we'll have some negative and painful experiences. In the process of this changing environment, there is the constant reality of our spiritual nature that can center us and keep us aware of the unchanging reality of our spiritual being in the midst of a changing world. When we have this view and when we begin to look at the experiences of life in this way, we know that the unchanging part of our nature, the spiritual side, the soul, the spirit, if you will, cannot be touched by the physical experiences. And so as the physical us changes, the unchanging spiritual us is moving in unceasing progression toward an understanding and a claiming of who and what we really are. In the midst of this process is consciousness, or the dynamic of mind. Your mind and my mind determine how we feel about the circumstances of life. We believe that there is a divine mind. That is, that God in His infinite wisdom and in His divine nature has a mind which is creative and which permeates all that is in life. And if our physical human minds connect with the divine mind of God, then we connect with the infinite source of intelligence and guidance and all of the resources that are available to us from the universal nature of divine mind or God. When that happens, we are empowered to be guided and directed in how we should behave, how we should think, the way in which we should go in the circumstances and situations in which we find ourselves in life. If we are aware of the dynamic of our mind and the ability that our mind has to change the world in which we live, we have within our power a magnificent creative ability to create and recreate our environment. That means that we may not change the experiences that take place in our lives, but we can always change the way that we feel about those experiences. And as we change the way that we feel about the experiences of our lives, the negative and hurtful experiences don't have dominant power over us because we know that we can transcend them through the creative power of our mind and the connection of that mind to divine mind. We believe that evolution, spiritual and physical, is moving this entire planet into a new age of understanding. We believe that as time marches on and moves through the process of human existence, that there are phases of development and understanding, and that from the beginning of human experience to the point where we find ourselves, that the consciousness of God has been with us, helping, guiding, and directing us as humankind to unfold and to become that which we have been from the beginning of life, and that is a perfect, dynamic, whole, balanced, and harmonious spiritual being. Our challenge is to be aware of the connection that can be made between divine mind and our mind, the connection that can be made in our conscious thought between our thought process and the thought process of God. When that connection is made, when that awareness is in the midst of our thought process, we begin to think in a different way. And as we begin to think in a different way, we can create our environment not to change the world, but to change our world. Not to recreate the outer world, but to recreate our world. And as we recreate our world and our environment, we join with others of like mind who change collectively the consciousness, the awareness, the mind, and the direction of the world. It is not the world that we need to worry about. It is our world, our mental world. And as we change our mental world, one person at a time, one group at a time, and join with others of like mind, we will change this entire planet and the world. And the world is changing and evolving and becoming the positive and magnificent place that it has always been and was created from the foundation of time to be. That's sometimes difficult to claim when we see circumstances and situations in the world. But in truth, we know that this world was created by God out of good, and that good is the magnificent essence that exists and sustains the entire planet. We invite you to recreate your world and to take responsibility for changing the way that you think about circumstances and situations in life. Connect your consciousness with the consciousness of divine mind or God. And regardless of your religious belief, regardless of what church you go to or your religious tradition, you have the power within your faith, within your tradition, to claim the positive and magnificent aspects of connecting your thought process with the process of divine mind, and thereby recreating your world, our world, and then impacting the world. We believe in prayer as a healing and centering force. We'd like to pause at this part of the program to invite you to join with us in a reflection and a moment of prayer. Eternal God, we gather together our hearts and minds in the great joy that we have as we recreate our world. And as we recreate our world, we recreate the world. And we align ourselves with your divine mind, your magnificent consciousness, and your infinite love. We do these things in the name of faith, in the name of hope, in the name of love. Amen.
That was a wonderful message, that every time we want change, it has to begin with ourselves.
Very important. I think when we want change, so often we see a circumstance or a situation, or maybe we even see the whole world, and we want it changed. We want the big picture changed. And often we fail to see that if we begin by changing our world or our picture of the world, then the larger picture will change.
Yes, and we complain about politics, we complain about religion, we complain about family, we complain about neighbors, we complain about every aspect of our lives. And if your message were taken to heart, then we wouldn't complain about them, we would try and change ourselves. And I know I heard a woman say one time, which made a big impression on me, someone asked her, are your husband and children still being a trial to you? And she said, they're still acting the same, but I've changed. And this was a wonderful lesson that she had learned, that she had to change within herself. And whatever they do, that's their right and their privilege. And they need then to, when she changed herself, they would perhaps then change themselves. But as long as she's nagging them and being horrid to them, then they would not change.
Mm-hmm. In our church, we've talked about the Lord Change Me prayer group, and we don't have one at our fellowship, but there are prayer groups across the country that are devoted to the Change Me philosophy, which is a process of meeting and praying for needs that people have in their lives, but not to pray that those circumstances be changed, but that those praying would change within themselves.
themselves.
So they don't ask for God to change the situation, but to change the way that we think about it. And I think that's very important, especially in the negative experiences that we have in life. If there's something that has hurt us, if there's something that has caused us pain, if there's an illness, if there's something in our life that really has hurt us to the core, if we begin the process of prayer and centering ourselves, not looking to change that situation and to remove it, but instead asking Spirit or God to change our way of looking at it and to change us and to change what's in us instead.
Yes, and we so often just expect everyone else to change, but we don't. We think we don't need change. And I've been reading several books recently for a specific reason about life after death, and they all say, these new metaphysical books all say the same thing, that thought does it. And at your church, we always say words and thoughts have molding power, so let us careful be, knowing that we're building our eternity. And these books back that up 100%. And Arthur Ford, who was a very wonderful and world-famous medium, the day after he died, he came back to Ruth Montgomery and gave her information. I recently reread that book, and it's very moving because he says the same things in his information to her, that it's thought that changes everything, and they can move about by way of thought. They create whatever they wish by way of thought. And the more advanced the person, or the more wide awake, spiritually wide awake the person, then the less they're going to be looking for things outside themselves, and they take the self-responsibility.
And of course, the ultimate change that we're all going to make in the physical is the transition from this life to the next.
Yes.
And so if we are in the process of becoming, coming to the true understanding of who and what we are, we become better at accepting and dealing with change. And I think that, just as you had said, that the truly spiritual people, the true people that are centered in the presence of God, can make that transition easily and with little effort. And our thought process doesn't change. You know, so often we think that when we die, pass into spirit, we go to heaven, that everything changes. And really, in truth, the process of mind continues to operate. And so the same processes that operate on the physical level of mind will operate in the spiritual from the aspect of what people are feeling and how they're thinking. And so that projection of thought carries us forth. One of the things that Arthur Ford and others have said from the other side is that when we pass over into the next life, that we experience exactly what we expect to.
Yes.
That for the traditional Christian, if they expect to see angels and Jesus, that's what they'll see. If they expect to see golden staircases and houses and crystal, that's what they'll see. Because the process of mind allows us to continue into that process.
Yes. But then after they've been there for a while, if they have wild expectations and unreasonable expectations, then they see that it's just their own expectation being fulfilled, and it's not truth, and it's not learning. And they go to the halls of wisdom and the halls of learning. That's one thing, but when they create these glamorous situations for themselves, then that's another, and that's not lasting. And it's so exciting to know that nothing does change, that only our consciousness changes, and so very little. That's amazing, isn't it?
It changes very little. And the other issue is that what we think is not important from the standpoint of creating things, because spiritual things already are done.
Yes.
If we look at the book of Genesis, God created the world and He's finished. He was finished in the beginning, and He's finished in the beginning of us. We're in the process of becoming and changing. God never changes, and therefore the real power of divine mind is a constant reality. And if we have a picture, an outpicturing, an ideation, an idea of what life after death is, or what life in the physical is, or what married life is, or what the perfect child is, or what the perfect job is, those are pictures that we've created. The perfect job and the perfect person and the perfect life are still the perfection that they've always been. And when we create what we believe to be true, but as we create what we believe to be true, when we pass over, we're going to have, in a short period of time, a clear vision of what is really true.
Yes.
And that's never changed.
And we're going to see truth exhibited there. He gave an example of a man who had gone fishing, and he caught all these wonderful, beautiful fish. And he was thinking, what a beautiful spot. I wish I could fish here. And suddenly there was a stream and the fish were there. And he wasn't even aware that, well, they just suddenly appeared, but they did, and he caught all the fish. And then he was hoping he could tell his wife what he had, about the wonderful fish he had caught. So his thoughts went back to his wife, and suddenly he was with her there in her home, in their home. And she was wearing black and looking very glum and sad. And he wondered, well, why is she looking so sad when the world is so beautiful? He had just been out fishing, and he was trying to tell her about the fish, and he could not. And so that's an example how the thought creates whatever it is, even if it's temporary and even if it's extraneous and not something that's going to be lasting.
In the Bible, in the story of the crucifixion, we have a great example of the process of mind and the choice of mind at the moment or time of death. And there you have the picture of the Christ being crucified, and on either side are two very opposite views of life speaking to the divine. One whom the church says is Dismas, but whatever his name was, but Dismas is one who said, I'm here and I deserve to be here. Take me with you. Take me out of this experience and let me go on. The other, who is the negative influence, taunts the Christ or the divine and says, if you're really who you say you are, take us off the cross and let us go back. Well, when you think about those two alternatives, would we really want to go back to physical life, or would we want to go on to eternal life? But so often we want what we want. And so our mind says, give us back what we had. Give us the security of what we had. Put us back where we are. But Spirit is always telling us and giving us the choice to say, don't leave me here. I know where I am. I know what I've done wrong. I acknowledge what I've done wrong. Now I want to go on to something else. And when we make that conscious choice, we're able to go much more freely. The one who wanted to be taken off the cross and go back to life didn't go back to life. We don't know what his life was like. We know that Dismas was promised by Christ Jesus himself that he would be in paradise that day. And so that choice is always ours, to accept the circumstance and go on, or to moan and groan and wish that we could go back.
Yes, wistful thinking doesn't really create any positive results. Well, the way we live our life is determined by our thoughts, which you so well point out. So it behooves us to think positive, constructive, productive thoughts. And if we could only realize that all the time, it would be a different world entirely.
If we could strive to see the good in every situation, and I think most of us are pretty good at seeing the good in good situations, but seeing the good in negative situations is the challenge. But we have to first accept the fact that when we're in a negative situation, we are there. And I think that denying that we're hurt, or that we're defeated, or that we have any kind of negative experience in life is self-defeating in and of itself. I think we need to acknowledge where we are. And when we acknowledge where we are, then deny the power that that experience has over our process of mind and over the true spiritual essence of who we are, and then direct our thinking towards where we should go from there.
That's right. And the books we read, the television we watch, the people with whom we visit, all make a difference in our thinking, because if they pull us down, then we know we need to have less of that. And if they uplift us and give us inspiration, then we know we need to spend more time that way. And to be also spend more time alone in introspection, because we know that meditation and introspection are the ways to deeper living, to deeper spiritual truth, and to deeper self-understanding.
They strengthen us and they empower us to do the things we need to do.
Yes, and then they create the helpful thoughts that we need to have to progress, instead of to stand still or to slide back. And also, just by tuning in to the infinite, to God, the whole, we're able then to take change and use it constructively, instead of being frightened by change and being paralyzed.
It's a little bit like the mathematician. We talk about so often the fact that if you have a scientist or a mathematician, those people are usually interested in solving problems and
Yes.
dealing with questions in life. And so as they are given a problem, which may be very perplexing and impossible to solve, they work at it, they are diligent in their effort, and then they solve the problem or they come to the solution. And then as soon as they do that, they welcome more problems and challenges so that they can solve those as well. And that's the mental process that we need to move through. When a mathematician sees a problem on a piece of paper, it is just that. It's a problem on a piece of paper that he or she begins to work through. And as soon as that problem is solved, they're open and receptive, saying to the world, bring me some more
Yeah.
problems. And if you bring me your problems, I'll do my best and I'll get a solution. And as soon as I solve that, I'm ready for another problem.
Yes, but not to try and solve other people's problems for them. That's a very important lesson. And when we are over possessive and over domineering, it always backfires and creates problems in our own lives, and has the reverse effect on the people with whom we're trying to mold, instead of allowing them to mold themselves and do their own thinking.
And the process is to change our world.
Yes.
And the focal to what I was talking about in the talk was to change our world and not worry about changing the people around us or changing the globe, at least not as a predominant effort that we have. Certainly there are things that we can do on a global level or on a community level or to help others, but we're probably talking about 20%
Yes.
of what we do. 80% of our being should clearly be devoted to improving ourselves and our own way of thinking and changing and recreating our world.
Exactly. And when we do, as you've said so beautifully, when we do change ourselves, then we see the world around us changing. When we are more open and accepting and productive, then the world becomes a mirror.
Mhm. And what we see around us is always going to be changing.
Yes.
And we can never really predict what that change is going to be or what those experiences are going to be, but we can always predict how it is we're going to think about them.
And we need to always remember not to try and change the other person, and that's such an important factor in our lives, whether we're parents, teachers, bosses, or whatever our work and our role in life, just to change ourselves and not try and change others, even the children, because on a soul level, they're always adult, and they're as adult as we are, and they're as advanced as we are. And the beggar on the street might be of a higher soul development than someone who has a very great deal of material wealth.
Right. So the challenge is always to recreate ourselves, and Reverend Freelander and I have been sharing with you some ideas about recreating your world and changing the way that you think. We invite you to apply these to your lives and look forward to seeing you next time.